County 8th grade students. If you remember, my name is Dean Burris and I work for Knox County School Social Studies Department. And you and I worked together last week looking at immigration during the Industrial Revolution of the United States. So we explored the experiences of Irish, German, and Chinese immigrants as they came to the United States and settled in different places over here. So in order to do that, we looked at some pages from your textbook, and we answered a critical thinking question in that section, and then we analyzed some primary source documents. So what I'd like for us to do today to sort of wrap this up is to go back and look at the responses that you gave to those questions for the reading in the textbook and then also for the primary source documents. And then we'll do sort of a wrap-up activity to review that information and then look at how that immigration during the 1800s compares to immigration that's still happening today in the 21st century. So the first thing that we're going to do is look at your responses to the critical thinking question that was in the textbook reading. So in the textbook, we looked at the push-pull factors and the impact of Irish and German immigration. And then at the bottom, we had to answer this critical thinking question that asked you to describe the similarities in the experiences of Irish and German immigrants. So think about what you put for that answer. And on this, there's really no exactly right or wrong answer, because you could put this in your own words and use the information that you have up there to sort of come up with your own answer. But I'll go ahead and share with you the answer that I came up with. So I said that both German and Irish immigrants settled in cities. Both groups brought about changes to American society. So with the Irish, they brought about political changes. And then with Germans, they brought about changes in education with the introduction of kindergarten. And then both worked in and led labor unions. Now, in addition to this, we also learned about Chinese immigrants and their additions to American society. So even though that's not asked in this question, I'm going to go ahead and tell you what I thought about how the Chinese immigration experience compared to the Irish and the Germans. So the Chinese also settled in cities like the Irish and the Germans, but they clustered together and tended to form like Chinese districts, like Chinatowns that exist in big cities today. And they were also the largest group of workers on the Underground Railroad, and they ended up being a highly skilled workforce when we think about American industry today. So now let's look at some of those primary source documents that we analyzed to learn a little bit more about this. So the first document we looked at was this cartoon that was printed in a newspaper that was called American Citizens. And the two questions, or the three questions that it asked to help us analyze this was, number one, it said across the top of the article, it reads, quote, "Already the enemies of our dearest institutions, like the foreign spies and the Trojan horse of old, are within our gates. They are disgorging themselves upon us at the rate of hundreds of thousands every year. They aim at nothing short of conquest and supremacy over us. Explain the reference to the Trojan horse of old." So remember, this references the Trojan horse in Troy during the Trojan Wars. And again, this was sort of your take on this. So I'll go ahead and read you what my answer was for this. I said, like the Trojan horse in Troy, Irish immigrants came into the U.S. innocently, but once they're here, they were seen as dangerous. And of course, that was the opinion of many Americans at the time. Number two said to list anti-immigrant references from the article. So this was information that we needed to pull directly from the primary source. And so I listed foreign pauper labor, and pauper basically is just a poor person. Papal aggression, so papal is referencing the Pope, the leader of the Catholic Church. The corruption of youth morals, and then excessive taxes. And then number three, the article asked us to think about why were the Irish so hated. And so my answer to that was they were seen as poor, immoral, and they were Catholic. In the second primary source document we looked at, it was called The Land of Gold, Reality versus Fiction, and this was essentially about Chinese immigration. So the first question asked us to list reasons why the Chinese were so undesirable, and there were a lot that were in this primary source that we could have listed. So some of the ones that I put were that they were seen as not useful, they didn't contribute to society, they evaded taxes, they didn't help settle California, and they did not build or invest in anything. And then the second question asked us to compare and contrast the feelings about the Chinese with the feelings about the Irish from the previous primary source document. So I wrote, the Irish were undesirable because many Americans felt that they wanted to bring their immoral Catholic culture into the United States. The Chinese were seen as undesirable because they did not try hard enough to become part of American society. So it was almost as if Americans disliked the Irish because they wanted to be too much into American society, whereas they disliked the Chinese because they didn't want to be as much a part of American society. So they sort of wanted it both ways. So now that we've sort of reviewed that information, let's think about how all of this wraps up. So you should have this short little document. And again, it reminds us of the standard that we're looking at. And that is 8.39 to identify the push-pull factors for the Irish and German immigration and describe the impact of their arrival in the United States prior to the Civil War. And then also remember that we included Chinese immigrants in last week's lesson. So let's sort of wrap this up together in thinking about what we've learned. So we're going to quickly review and identify the push-pull factors for Irish, German, and Chinese immigrants. And I'm going to go ahead and type these directly onto the screen so that you can follow along with me. So just think about what we'll just put one for each of these instead of listing a whole bunch under each one. But just remember, push factors are factors that push people to leave one country and go to another country like the United States, things that are happening in their home country. Pull factors are reasons that people come to a country. So what is it about the United States that would pull people to want to come here? So let's start with the Irish. So what do we think is the biggest push factor that might have influenced Irish immigrants to come here to the United States? So the first thing that comes to mind to me is the thing that most of you probably thought about as well, and that is the potato famine. So remember, the potato famine caused the main crop of Ireland to fail. It led to lots of starvation and death. So that was a primary reason why the Irish came here to the United States. For the Germans, remember there was a lot of stuff happening in Germany at this time, but the primary reason was political unrest. Germany was trying to consolidate a lot of independent kingdoms into one country, and so that was leading to a lot of political instability and political persecution. And then for the Chinese, remember that they had a lot of issues with natural disasters. So things like flooding, typhoons, and those factors contributed to pushing the Chinese to the United States. So for pull factors, what were things that were pulling these people to the United States? For the Irish, remember that we said that it was jobs, essentially. So they were looking for work so that they could make money and provide for their families. For the Germans, guess what? It was essentially the same thing. So they were also looking for jobs and financial stability. And then for the Chinese, let's see if you can guess what you think this might be. Oh, it's jobs, right? So we start to see a pattern here that all of these groups are looking for economic stability so that they can provide for their families and have a better life. So now let's move down to the second part of this review document, and this just sort of asks us some wrap-up questions. So the first question was, how did the arrival of Irish immigrants impact the U.S. prior to the Civil War? So this is going to go back directly to that little table that we looked at in the presentation and then the questions that we asked earlier. So think about what you think might be the biggest way that the arrival of Irish immigrants impacted the U.S. prior to the Civil War. When I think about Irish immigration and its biggest impact, I would probably say the political impact. So the Irish immigrants really changed politics in these big cities like New York and Boston and placed their own leaders in charge. For the Germans, what do you think is the biggest way that Germans impacted the United States? For me, when I think about Germans, because I'm a teacher, the first thing I think about is the introduction of kindergarten. So they really changed the American school system by having students start in kindergarten, just like you all did. And then for the Chinese, what was their biggest impact? When I think about Chinese immigrants during the 1800s, I automatically think about the Transcontinental Railroad. So they were the largest foreign labor force that worked on the Transcontinental Railroad. We're going to say they were the largest foreign force of workers on the Transcontinental Railroad. And then the last question down here sort of asks us to think about how immigration during the 1800s compares to immigration today in the United States. So do we still have people that want to come to the United States for various reasons and move here and live here and work here? Of course we do, right? So think about this question, and this is more of your opinion. America continues to attract immigrants from around the world. Have the attitudes of Americans toward immigrants changed? Cite examples to support your position. So think about over the past few years in the news and articles and things like that that you've read about immigrants coming into the United States, and think about the attitudes of Americans toward immigrants in the 1800s that we've talked about, and think about the attitudes of Americans toward immigrants today, and how do those two compare? So I'm not going to actually put my opinion down here because I want you to come up with your own, and I don't want my opinion to influence yours. So that's what I'm going to leave you with today, is just to think about how immigration compares today to what it was in the 1800s that we've talked about. So thank you for tuning in today and helping me learn more about and review immigration during the 1800s. And I hope you and your family stay healthy and well. Have a good day.